We are going to get underway with the last Parsha in the book of Vayechi. Also, the last day of the civil year. If you want to pay any attention to that, I'll leave that for your discretion. So Parshas Vayechi is a fascinating Parsha. It's dominated by the brachos, the blessings that Yaakov gives to his grandchildren first, and then to his children, to his sons. And as the name of the Parsha implies, Vayechi Yaakov, Ruthie, I wonder if you need to turn your volume down, or maybe tune nearby. I'm just going to close the door. Can you hear me better now?
Patients can have the booster within 12 weeks of the first to allow more people to have a first dose. It had originally been 21 days.
I wonder if our administrator can mute everybody so I can concentrate. Okay, right. Parshas Vayechi begins with the account of summarizing the life of Yaakov in Mitzrayim for 17 years and dealing with the last sort of chapter in his very eventful career, and for that matter, his passing in Eretz Mitzrayim. So let's begin, not at the very beginning, but today I'd like to start with Pasuk Chaf Tes. So it's chapter 57, verse 29, which is the second pasuk in the parsha. Just for context, Vayechi. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yaakov lived in Israel for 17 years. Yaakov's day of death drew near. So he summoned his son, Yosef, his sponsor, in a kind of role reversal. Yosef is now the one who provides for his father and the rest of the family as well. So Yaakov summons his son, Yosef, and he says, I've got an important request that I would like to put to you. If I found favor in your eyes, literally this means put your hand under my thigh. This is a biblical expression associated with taking an oath. It's probably a euphemism as well. Please do not bury me in Egypt. That is Yaakov's dying wish. He realizes that his death is approaching, and this is what he says to Yosef: don't bury me in Egypt, but rather take my remains to the land of Canaan, bury me in Ma'aras HaMachpelah together with my family members in the family burial site, burial plot. Now, what's interesting is, I mentioned just now, Simna Yadcha Tachas Yirechi. It's an expression associated with taking an oath, with a vow. Rashi says, V'hashbeya, Simna Yadcha V'hashbeya, take an oath. But let's look closely what happens. Yosef responds in the next verse in Pasuk Lamed, take me from Egypt, bury me in my family plot. Vayomar, and Yosef replies, Anochi e'eseh kidvarecha, I will do according to your words. What happened to the vow? Rashi says, make an oath. He doesn't make an oath, he just says, I'll do it. He says, you asked me to do it? Okay, I can give you my word, I'll do it. Is that the same as taking a vow? Evidently not, because in the next pasuk, Yaakov says, Hishavali, swear to me. Hishavalo, and he swears. So Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz asks a question here. He says, if means take a vow, then why didn't Yosef take the vow? Why did Yosef simply say, I'll do it? And it's only afterwards that Yaakov insists, no, you've got to take an oath. And so he does take an oath. Then he says that, why does Yosef say, Anochi e'eseh kidvarecha? It would be evident just from the context that Yosef is speaking, Yosef is responding, and Yosef is the one who says, e'eseh kidvarecha. He says, Lama ze anochi. playing on words from the beginning of Parshas Toldos. Vayomar Anochi Aseh Kivarecha. Why do we need the word Anochi? So Rabbi Eibeschutz has an interesting suggestion here. I think sheds light on this whole exchange. Yosef said Anochi Aseh Kivarecha, and he declined initially to swear. Why? Because what Yosef meant, Anochi, from my point of view, as far as I'm concerned, I'll do what you ask. But I can't guarantee it because, after all, I'm the viceroy. I'm not the regent. I'm not the king. I'm the advisor to the king, the prime minister. But the king is above me. Pharaoh may not agree. He may not let me go, and he may not let you go. He may not allow me to take your remains out of Egypt because Yaakov was a kind of totem. Yaakov was regarded as, firstly, the father, obviously, of the savior of Yosef, but also, according to our tradition, the famine was alleviated with the arrival of Yaakov. So it could be Yosef says to his father, Pharaoh may not agree to allow your remains to be taken out of the land of Mitzrayim. So therefore, I'm not going to swear. I'll do my best. Yaakov says that's not enough. You must take a vow. And what Yaakov really means is, if you take a vow, if you swear that you will do it, then Pharaoh will not be able to impede you. Actually, that's exactly what we find, because if you take a look, you don't have to read, you can look at your leisure. If you look in chapter 50, verse 6, towards the very end of the book, towards the end of our Parasha, Pharaoh says, go and bury your father in Canaan, kasher hishbi'acha, as he bound you with an oath, as he adjured you. That's the correct word, English word. Adjured, as he adjured you, kasher hishbi'acha. From where we see that Yaakov was right, that because of the oath, Pharaoh was unable to stand in the way because he can't compel Yosef to breach his oath. That is what Rabbi Eibeschutz suggests. That's why Yosef initially did not want to take a vow. Yaakov insisted. That's why he says, Anochi aseh kivarecha. As far as I'm concerned, I'll do it, but I can't guarantee it will happen because Pharaoh may override me. He's got veto power. Yaakov said that's not good enough. But then he says something else which I think is very clever. Fits in well to the wording of the pasuk as well. Anochi eseh kidvarecha. Yosef is saying, you know what, Dad? That is a jolly good idea. I'm going to do the same as you. Just as you have adjured me, just as you have asked me to ensure that your remains are not allowed to languish here in Egypt forevermore, but rather you want to be buried in Canaan, I'm going to do the same. So Yaakov then said, if that's the case, you've got to swear you'll do it. Why? Because Yaakov understood that Yosef was hinting, you know what, actually, I am going to say the same thing to my brothers or my sons, that after I die, that I want to be buried in Canaan as well. What will happen, says Yaakov, thinks Yaakov to himself, if Yosef says that, if he does the same as I'm doing, the next generation will say to themselves, why should we trouble ourselves to take the remains of Yaakov to Mitzrayim, and from Mitzrayim to Canaan, and the same for Yosef again, a few years later, who knows how much longer he'll live. Let's just do one-stop shopping. We just go once, we'll take Yaakov, we'll take Yosef, and we'll do the job that way. Therefore, Yaakov said, he's shavali. I don't want you to say, that's a good idea. You're going to do the same thing, because then the Bnei Israel will simply seek to, for reasons of efficiency, to take us both together. Of course, what Yaakov may have had a premonition is, I don't want to wait around until they take Yosef. How long was it until they took Yosef? How long was it? Was it 210 years? Well, it was a bit less, because the 210 years began from when Yaakov and his family went down to Mitzrayim. So it was not 210 years, but it was 287 years, because 283 years. It was 183 years later, because it was less than 17 years. But actually, it was another 40 years, because they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Basically, Yaakov said, I don't want my remains to languish for 223 years. When I die, that's when I want to be buried in Mitzrayim. I thought about this for those who were participating in the seminar we had last night on burial and cremation. So it's apropos a little bit to that as well. So therefore, Yaakov insists, Shavali take an oath, and so he did take an oath, and so as the Torah itself relates, Yaakov's remains were taken to bury in the Maras Machpelah. P.S. Yosef was indeed buried in the land of Israel. He was buried in Shechem. Yonatan Eibeschutz has a theory as to how that came about, which I don't want to dwell on right now, but that burial site is still demarcated to this day. It's not a very safe area, actually. It was trashed in the Intifada some years ago. Okay, we'll save that, maybe elaboration for another time. I don't want to dwell on political events. Let's talk, however, about a beautiful pasuk a few verses later. So Yaakov says to Yosef, I'm going to die. I can tell my day is approaching. Bury me in Ma'aras HaMachpelah. Yosef says he will do it. Well, it's not surprising, therefore, that not long after Yosef gets the word that your father is on his deathbed. In the beginning of chapter 48, a few verses later, Vayechi your father is ill. So Yosef took his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, and they told Yaakov, your son Yosef is coming to you. Yisrael, meaning Yaakov, summoned his strength and he sat up in bed. Now, if you take a look, we'll just skip another verse or two for what we are looking to focus upon. Yaakov says in verse Ches, Pasuk Ches, verse 8, Vayar Yisrael es bnei Yosef, Vayomer mi eila. Yaakov saw the two sons of Yosef and said, who are they? Now, it could be that he had not seen them before, which is unlikely. Could be they grew a lot since he last saw them, which maybe is more of a possibility. Perhaps it could well be that Yaakov's eyesight was somewhat impaired, failing, maybe with old age is another possibility. We mentioned recently that Yaakov was maybe prematurely old. We spoke the other day, last week, in our little voice note for those who listened to it, about how Yaakov's visage was that of a haggard, very elderly person. Perhaps his eyesight was failing as well. But at any rate, it could also be simply that Yaakov was expressing pride or something important that he perceived in the sons of Yosef, as we shall see. Anyway, in Pasuk Yud, in verse 10, Yaakov's eyesight was indeed failing, he could not see well. Now look at the next pasuk. Vayoma Yisrael ad Yosef re'ei fanecha lo pilalti. I did not expect to see your face. And behold, God has enabled me to see also your progeny, your children as well. Re'ei fanecha lo pilalti. So on this, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz has a very interesting analysis. Yaakov said something a little bit similar when he says, Re'o fanecha lo filalti, I did not expect to see your face. Of course, he doesn't mean now. He's reflecting on the last few decades since Yosef was 17 years old, when Yosef was taken from his father for 22 years. During all of those years, Yaakov had given up Yosef for dead, or maybe not, but he had not anticipated. He maybe was hoping against hope that he might one day see his face again. So he's reflecting on that, and he says, there were 22 long years when I didn't think I would ever see you again. Now, what is fascinating is that when Yaakov gets the word that Yosef is still alive, if you take a look, turn back to chapter 45, verse 28. I think it's maybe the last pasuk in the parak, actually. Yaakov has been persuaded that it is true. Yosef is still alive. After initially he couldn't believe it, his heart skipped a beat. Lo hemin lahem. Then he says, "Vatichi ruach Yaakov avihem, vayoma Yisrael rav." Amazing. Od Yosef Benichai. Targum says, Sagi li chedva. This is too much joy. This is too much jubilation. The thought that Yosef is still alive. Look at the next words. Elcha ve'erenu b'terem amus. I will go and see him before I die. Rabbi Eibeschutz explains that this expression, Re'o fanecha lo filalti, to see, their oath, and what he said earlier, ve'erenu b'terem amus, I will see. It wasn't just that Yaakov wanted to see, to lay eyes upon him before he would die, before Yaakov's death. It was more than that. They say that certain great people, it was certainly said of the Ari, and maybe of others as well, probably of others also, but certainly it was said of the Arizal that he had the capacity, he had the like prophetic intuition to discern a person's character by his face, to tell about him, to tell his thoughts, to tell his motivation, to see into his soul, to determine if a person was worthy or possibly a Bal Aveira just by seeing him. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, that's what the Torah means here. When Yaakov had said, "Oh Yosef Benichai, I will go and see him before I die," what he meant was Estakel b'tzalmo imadain tselem elokim alav. I will look at his image, that is to say, the visage of my son, to see whether I can still discern the tselem elokim, the presence of God on his face. Meaning that I would like to see, is Yosef who still lives, but does he live spiritually, or has he succumbed to the debauchery and the temptation of Mitzrayim in which he has been immersed for all of those years? It's true that superficially, at the simple level, Yaakov thinks that Yosef has been torn apart by an animal. But maybe in a prophetic way, and maybe Yaakov himself doesn't really appreciate what he's saying. But prophetically, when he says Chaya Ra Chalasu, a wild animal has eaten him, the wild animal is also a remez to the Yetzer Hara. And the wild animal takes the form of course, the wife of Potiphar. Now this is hinted to in back in Parshas Vayechi, when the Torah describes how Yosef was brought down to Egypt as a slave. He was sold, as we know, to Potiphar, Sris Paro, and if you take a look in chapter 40, I think, chapter 39, verse 6. We're actually, in a way, covering quite a lot of ground because, as we know, the story is intertwined, interconnected. So Yosef quickly became the comptroller of the house of Potiphar. Vayechi Yosef Yefei Soar V'Yefei Mar'eh. Yosef was good looking, and he was self-conscious as well. He was self-aware. He knew he was good looking. Says Rashi, Kevin Shiratzmo Moshel, when Yosef saw that he has risen to the top, then he actually is in charge of the whole household. Hiskil Ochel Shosem, a sal sel dasar, began to eat and to drink, to look after himself, and to preen himself. Masal sel dasara, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, said the Almighty, Avichem Isabel, your father is in mourning for you. And you're preening yourself, you're grooming yourself, you're twirling your payas. I am going to cause the bear to not really to assault you, but to approach you, to menace you. Of course, the bear here is the wife of Potiphar. I mean, I don't know if she would appreciate being compared to a bear, probably not, but this is the Chaya Ra Chalasu. This is the wild animal that menaces Yosef. This is the Yetzer Hara. So when Yaakov says, I never thought I would see your face, I didn't know whether I would be able to discern the presence of God on your face. So this is the meaning. And he says that, he adds on another very interesting idea. He says the Tselem Elokim is what keeps the Yetzer Hara at bay. The Tselem Elokim is that which enables a person to resist the blandishments of the evil inclination, especially when it comes to matters of immorality, especially sexual temptation. It's the Tselem Elokim. And he uses, I think, a deliberate metaphor, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, when he says that an animal, even a ferocious animal, is naturally cautious, is afraid of a person with Tselem Elokim. And it's actually true. The animals in any wild animals, whether in the forest, in the bush, in the African jungle, there are many animals there which could easily overwhelm a person, but they normally don't do that. Even a tiger or a lion or a hyena, these are all creatures that could quickly tear a person limb from limb. It's like the two hunters who are in the Indian safari, and they see a tiger starting to run after them. So they start to run. So one turns to him and says, "You can't outrun a tiger." He says, "I don't have to outrun the tiger. I just have to run faster than you." So if a wild animal is in pursuit of a person, he's a goner. But it doesn't happen very often because wild animals are naturally cautious or afraid of people. Now, one could give a naturalistic explanation for that. Could be it's hinted to in the pasuk as well, in Parashat Noach. But the point is that a person, by the nature of his humanity, has the natural ability, or even without even realizing it, that the animals tend to be afraid. Only if the animal is threatened or desperate, there can be cases, of course, but it's quite uncommon, quite infrequent. So that's what he says, that when a person has a Tselem Elokim, as long as he's alive, so the animals will naturally stay at bay. They won't assault him. They won't come in and destroy him. He means it in the spiritual way, brother. When a person has a Tselem Elokim, when he has the presence of God with him, he can avert, or he can resist the assault of the Yetzer Hara. So this is what it says, that I didn't imagine I would even see your face. And now that I do, he says, now I can see, I said that you were not guilty of that transgression, albeit the temptation was intense. And he says, I didn't think I would see you, and now I have merited to even see your children. And Rabbi Eibeschutz says, the fact that even your children are righteous, it shows that you must not have transgressed. You're not just sort of running on your own inertia. You maybe have sinned, your level has fallen, but you're somehow in a Benoni position, because if that were the case, your children probably would have succumbed to Egypt. They were born in the palace, raised and educated in the Eton College, whatever they have of some similar environment for royalty of Egyptian courtiers. And the fact that your children are righteous as well, that is like a confirmation, that is an affirmation of your own righteousness. Now, I want to tell you something that's slightly controversial. I wasn't sure whether I should even mention it, but as many of you know, I have a great weakness for history. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz is a very important, almost I wouldn't use the word pivotal figure, but a very influential personality, because he was a party to the disastrous dispute between Rabbi Yaakov Emden and himself, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz. And this was a bitter rivalry that unfortunately reverberated for generations, and some have even traced much more modern developments back to this terrible event of the machlokas between these two great Torah leaders and Torah personalities, surrounding in turn the heresy of Shabtai Tzvi. Now, I don't want to revisit that at length at all, but I will tell you that Rabbi Yaakov Emden accused our author, Yonatan Eibeschutz, of being a secret sympathizer with Shabtai Tzvi. which he vehemently denied repeatedly, etc. But the accusation still hung in the air and actually riled hundreds and hundreds of European rabbanim at the time. The matter was eventually, I wouldn't say completely resolved, but it kind of, the lid was kept on it finally by the intervention of Rabbi Cheskel Landau. I don't know whether you've heard of that name. Perhaps you've heard of the book by which he is known, Noda B'Yehuda. Rabbi Cheskel Landau was the Av based in Prague, and he, although still a relatively young man, he was the Rav in Prague. Okay, I don't want to go too much into history, but he suggested a kind of compromise, which ultimately a very uneasy truce eventually descended upon these two great personalities. One of the things he wrote in that letter is, how can it be that a man, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, who is so charismatic, who is such a brilliant educator, pedagogue, a great Talmudist, who's known for his righteousness, for his piety, for his humility, who has raised many hundreds, even they say thousands of disciples over the years, who has hundreds of students and former students who are today great rabbis in Israel. He said, how can it be that the students are in Gan Eden and the mentor, the rabbi, is in purgatory? He says, it can't be. The fact that he has such righteous followers, all of whom took up the cause on behalf of their Rebbe, he says it can't be that the students are in Gan Eden and the Rebbe is in Gehenna. That's what Rabbi Yonatan Yehuda said, among other things. I wonder if there may be a little bit of echo of that here as well, where Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz says the fact that Yosef has righteous children, that itself is the most convincing and the most durable testimony to Yosef's righteousness as well. Okay, that's just a thought which I had. Now, we've advertised the shir tonight as Ephraim and Menashe, Yaakov's sleight of hand. So I would like to spend the last minutes of the shir looking at this fascinating passage where Yaakov undertakes finally to bless his grandchildren. So Yosef identifies them as, who are they? He says, these are my sons, and God has granted me. Yaakov says, I didn't even think I would see you. Now I see your children as well. How blessed am I? How fortunate am I? Yosef takes the two boys. We don't know exactly how old they were. The implication is, I suppose we could calculate how they were. They were young adults. They're probably in their 20s. So they were, not children or lads, but possibly the Torah is speaking of them in those terms because they are Yaakov's grandchildren, and therefore Yaakov sees them definitely as not only the next generation, but the subsequent generation. And really that's part of the point, because Yaakov, as we know, will bless Ephraim and Menashe, that each of them will achieve the status of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. That is to say, his grandsons will be regarded as his own sons. Okay, at any rate, what I want to explain in the last minutes that we have is the very well-known imagery of Yaakov, who is facing Yosef. Yosef brings the two boys towards him, the two sons, Yosef's sons, the grandsons of Yaakov. He presents them to his father, orienting Menashe, the elder, to the right of Yaakov, so that Yaakov can extend his right hand upon Menashe, and he does the same for Ephraim, or the opposite for Ephraim, with his left hand. And that is described close with precision in Pasuk Yud Gimel, verse 13. Vayikach Yosef eshnehem es Ephraim bimino, mismol Yisrael. He takes Ephraim in his right hand, which means it's the left side of his father Israel. Ves Menashe bismolo, miyamin Yisrael, vayagesh elav, and he approaches his father. But Yaakov, who the Torah calls here Yisrael, stretches out his right hand and places it upon the head of Ephraim. Ephraim is the younger. Vesmolo, in his left hand, Alosh Menashe. Sikel es yadav. Sikel es yadav means to cross his hands. He distorts his hands, if you can see my screen, distorts his hands in that way. Ki Menashe HaBechor, the Torah says explicitly, and like for emphasis, Menashe is the firstborn, but Yaakov distorts his hands. Now, this is one of the most famous images in the Torah, and of course, we need to consider what is going on here. What did Yosef think? What did Yaakov think? Why did Yaakov stretch out his hands in that way? Why didn't Yaakov instruct Yosef to reverse the position of the boys or tell the boys themselves to change places? And of course, why is it that Yaakov decided to give the superior bracha to Ephraim, the younger one? And actually, maybe let's read the next couple of verses because it's important for us as well. Barach Yosef, and he blesses them and he articulates a certain blessing. Let's turn to the next passage, Tet Zayin, and actually the one after that as well. Yud Zayin 17. Vayar Yosef ki Yashish Aviv es Yadimin. Yosef saw that his father had put his right hand upon the head of Ephraim. This was bad in his eyes, in his opinion, in the opinion of Yosef. And he lifted up his father, he supported his father's hand, to remove it from the hand of Ephraim, and to position it on the head of Menashe. And Yosef says, Lo chen avi, this is a mistake. This one is the firstborn. Menashe, put your right hand on his head. And of course, Yaakov demurs and he says, Yadati b'ni banat, Yadati, I know. He will become great. But Ulam achiv hakaton, his younger brother, Yigdal mimenu. His younger brother will be greater than this. At the very simple level, Yaakov anticipated that Ephraim would transcend Menashe, and therefore he gave Ephraim the superior bracha with his right hand. I know our time is nearly up, so let's try to, now that we've set the scene, let me tell you how Rabbi Eibeschutz explains this. He says that Yosef thought that the Kohen stands to the right. The Kohen, the one who does the avoda, is on the right. And because at that time the avoda was done by the firstborn, so Yosef imagined the Bechor will be the Kohen. So therefore, Menashe is the Bechor. He should be on the right. That was Yosef's view. Yaakov knew, however, that that would not remain the situation. The Bechorim would not remain always in the role of the Kohanim. On the contrary, that privilege would be concentrated in one of the 12 tribes, the tribe of Levi, and greater even than Avoda is Torah. And therefore, he says that just as we find in the Shevet Levi, Levi had 3 sons, Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. But of the 3 sons, which of the sub-tribes, that is to say, the descendants of which son of Levi were destined to carry the ark, the Aron? That was the tribe of Kahas, the sub-tribe, the family of Kahas. Kahas was the second born. So Rabbi Eibeschutz says that this is like a paradigm reflecting the fact that the younger son will actually supersede or will excel beyond the achievements of the older son. He quotes the Gemara that says, "Hizaharu b'vnei anim shemehem teitzei Torah." Be careful with the sons, the children of the poor, meaning the lower stratum of the socioeconomic ladder. Be cautious, be careful, be respectful of the aniyim, because from them will Torah emerge. Those who are wealthy maybe will be led after other pursuits. It is the humble, less affluent class who will achieve greatness in Torah. He quotes the pasuk, "Ki oz b'yadcha ugvura b'yaminecha." Oz is Torah. B'yadcha, he says, b'yadcha is gematria dal. Yadcha, yud, dalet, chaf, is gematria dal. B'yadcha, ki oz b'yadcha, gvura b'yaminecha. Gvura is strength and power, b'yaminecha is in the right, but Torah is in the left. Torah is the dal. Torah is b'yadcha. And he also says Yadcha is like Yad Keheh. Keheh means like blunted or faded. Yad Keheh, your less powerful hand is Yadcha is the left. V'Rabbi minecha, power, strength is in the right. But in the left, Yad Keheh, your weaker hand, that is where the Torah is to be found. And that is why Yaakov deliberately left Ephraim on the left side. The left is the weaker side. So Yaakov left Ephraim on the left, but he stretched out his right hand upon Ephraim, but he allowed him to retain his position on the left, meaning the subordinate position. The fact that Ephraim is subordinate, that is why he will achieve greatness. I just want to finish up. He says that Yosef waited to object until after the bracha. Yaakov immediately said, Hamalacha goelosi yivarecha senarim, and only after that did Yosef object. Why didn't Yosef immediately, when he saw that his father was reversing his hands in that way, why didn't he immediately say, Dad, you've made a mistake. Don't get confused. This one is the elder. That's why I put him on your right side. Just put your right hand upon his head. Yosef said it, but only after the bracha. Because he says that Yosef imagined that Yaakov will give a blessing for material success. And in material success, the left is going to be superior. This left is going to be superior because it's the northern side. I don't want to get too complicated, but if a person is facing the east, so his left side is to the north. It says, Harotza lahashir yatzpin. Somebody who wants to become wealthy will go to the north. So the left side is associated with wealth. And he thought that Yaakov is going to give a bracha for wealth. When he starts giving a bracha for spiritual attainment, Hamalacha goelosi, so he thought, no, you got it wrong. And finally, and with this we will end, Yaakov said, Achiv hagadol hakaton yigdal mimeno. Menashe will achieve greatness, but Ephraim, the younger brother, will exceed even more so. Will excel even more so. And Rashi says, Shemimenu yatsa Yehoshua. So Yehoshua is the one who received the Torah from Moshe. He was the successor to Moshe. Comes from Ephraim. And therefore, the fact that Ephraim is younger, that's why he will be greater. And he points out that the same is true for Kahas, which we already mentioned. Kahas was the younger brother of the sons of Levi. He was the one who carried the Aron, the most important of the accoutrements of the Mishkan. Moshe was the younger brother of Aharon. And I would point out as well that Yaakov himself, let's not forget, was the younger brother of Esau. And you know what? Yitzchak was the younger brother of Ishmael. Actually, the pattern, the norm that we find in the Torah is that the younger brother excels. The younger brother surpasses the older. And it's part of that narrative in which the sense of superiority or entitlement causes a person to languish behind. It's like, Avis, we're number two, we try harder. So Moshe became the lawgiver. Aharon was his companion, his brother, and his partner. But Moshe, Torah Tzivelanu Moshe, and we find consistently, of course, even in the case of David HaMelech himself, as is described in detail in the book of Shmuel, also the younger one ultimately excelled beyond the achievements of the older one as well. So what we've seen tonight, just to sum up, we've spoken about why Yosef said to Yaakov initially, I'll do it. And Yaakov said, swear to me. Of course, according to Yonatan and Eibeschutz, Yosef was saying to himself, that's a very good idea. I'm going to do the same as you. And Yaakov said, no, you can do the same as me. That's fine. In the meantime, take an oath that you'll carry out my instructions. I don't want to hang around until they take you. That's going to be a long, long time. We also learned that Roi panecha lo filalti. I didn't think I would see your face, because seeing your face doesn't just mean looking like I'm looking at my own face now on the computer screen. Perhaps you're looking at my face as well. But it means to see into your soul. I didn't think that I would see the tselem elokim upon your face, because I thought you were consumed by a chaya ra'a, a wild, ferocious animal, meaning the yetzer hara within every person. But I see you overcame it. I see you resisted that intense, acute temptation. And therefore, I see that even your children are righteous, and that itself is the testimony to your righteousness. And finally, we've seen why Yaakov did not tell the boys to reverse their places, because Yaakov deliberately wanted to demonstrate that the one who was on the left should be on the left, because the left, representing the inferior position, is the best place for Torah, excellent Torah greatness. And therefore, Yaakov placed his right hand, representing the more potent blessing, upon the head of Ephraim, although he was the youngest, and he deliberately left him in the left hand position. By the way, I'm a bit left-handed as well myself, so maybe that has some meaning, probably no meaning at all. But there you have it. Thank you very much for your participation. And I don't want to be facetious, but I hope the new year, even in the civil calendar, brings good things for all of us. Mitzvah Hashem, we finished the book of Bereshis together, and we look forward to continuing to the book of Shmos, Mitzvah Hashem, next week. And wish everyone a wonderful